My name is Houston Parks. Today is November 20th, 2013, and I am in Nashville, Tennessee to interview my good friend Ed Lawwell of Columbia. This interview is taking place as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Would you state your full name, please?
My full name is Thomas Edward Lawwell. The Thomas is abbreviated to T because as I was growing up, my family knew me as Ed, and so I later started using the the first initial with the middle name. So that's where I became T. Edward Lawwell.
And your date and place of birth?
My date of birth is 1934. I was born in the Halls Mill community of Bedford County. I was born at home. I was not born at a hospital. We had a country doctor from town came back and delivered me as well as all of my siblings except the last one.
And how many siblings do you have?
I'm the fifth of 9 children.
And I'm going to ask you about the place where you were born, but let me first ask about your grandparents. Did they all live in the same community?
My mother's parents lived in the community. My dad's parents were across the river, across the Duck River that is, in the 18th Civil District as opposed to the 11th Civil District. And that made a big difference in those times because the geography was quite a bit different. 18th Civil District was mostly wooded and gladed area and not very conducive for farming, where the 11th Civil District, which I grew up in, was more conducive to farming land. And so my family were farmers, and my immediate family, although my prior ancestors had been farmers and sawmill people, loggers people.
All right. Now, your grandparents on your father's side lived across the river.
Right.
Tell us about them and how they influenced you when you were young.
Okay. Now, my granddaddy died when he was at an early age, I'm not sure, in his 40s. So I never knew him. My daddy was maybe 18 or 19 years old when he died. He had a younger brother and a younger sister. But my grandmother, who I was very close to, remarried Mr. Tribb Lawwell, who was the first cousin of my granddaddy. So we grew up knowing our step granddaddy and living with my grandmother across the river from where we grew up.
And you mentioned that your grandmother Lawwell, you were very close to her,
Yes.
and you've said that she was one of the truly great ladies that you've known. And what made her so special?
Well, she was really truly a pioneer woman. I mean, there was no, in those, we're talking about when I knew her well was, say, the late 30s, early 40s. There was no electricity, there was no running water. They lived in this big log house. It was what you call the dog track house with a big hall down the center and 2 big rooms on each side and side rooms behind. And my step granddaddy always had a sawmill and a bunch of people that was working for him, and grandma would cook dinner with what we called it was lunch, middle of the day meals for all the sawmill hands and all the people that's working. There might be 8 or 10 people that's working. Some black, some white. All of the blacks would always eat secondly at the table, but grandma on her wood stove would fix all those meals, and she could make any food taste delicious. And I loved to go visit with her and just to hang around with her because she was just a delightful lady, and she loved her grandchildren, loved us more than anything. And I always loved to go there. I loved spending the night at her house. Really, I mean, it was dark, but it was had the best feather beds you ever saw to sleep in, and you know, it was just delightful to be around her. Really.
And what was her name?
Octi, and she was known as Miss Octi, or Aunt Octi. She'd been an Earnhardt before she married my granddaddy.
And then on the side of the river where you grew up is the Halls Mill community. Why was it called a community instead of town or city?
Okay. Well, the only thing was there was a country store and the Krause Chapel Lutheran Church. And there was an old mill. The skeleton of the building was still there, but the dam was no longer operational. It had been a flour mill that had been run by water power, but the dam had washed out, and it was no longer being fueled by water power. So the only thing that was really there was the bridge that went over the river, the country store, and the church, the Lutheran church there that I grew up in.
And I believe, didn't you grow up on a farm that was part of your mother's family farm?
But it was my grandmother's farm.
All right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right. Now tell us about your mother and her parents, your grandparents on your mother's side.
Yeah, my mother was a Claxton. She had both of my granddaddies died before I ever knew them. Her mother's daddy drowned in Duck River. It was a accident where some cousins had gotten in a sinkhole, and he went in to get them, and he wound up drowning in the hole himself. So mother dropped out of school, and after the 6th grade, she was oldest of 3 girls and a boy, and she dropped out of school when she was in the 6th grade. Incidentally, Daddy finished the 8th grade as far as he went in school, but mother went through the 6th grade, and Daddy went through the 8th grade.
What were your parents' names?
Allen was the daddy, Robert Allen Lawwell, and mother was Mattie Mae Claxton Lawwell.
All right. Tell us about the name Lawwell.
Well, there was a lot of controversy among our family members about how to pronounce it and how to spell it. Really, a lot of my immediate family slur it off and say it as if it's one syllable, Lawwell or Lawwell, you know. But I always went back to the old family cemetery over there, and my great granddaddy's tombstone was there, and he died in 1921, I believe, and it was just as plain as Bay, Lawwell. So that was the way I spelled it, and especially when I left home and would try to pronounce it where somebody could write it and get it down right. Everybody had trouble getting it spelled right anyway. I would pronounce it with 2 syllables to help get it down right.
Anyone ever tell you it's a good name for a lawyer?
Yes, I've been accused of changing my name. I did not. I've been also accused of changing my name because I was trying to be higher above my race and so forth there too.
Okay.
But I always got back to that old tomb rock on that cemetery.
What were the names of your grandparents on your mother's side, and how did they influence you?
Grandmother was Miss Emma. Of course, she was Claxton. After Granddaddy died, she married a Mr. Jackson. My granddaddy's name, I never knew him, but I think he was Robert Claxton. I don't know what his middle name was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned that you grew up in the small community of Halls Mill, and that's in Bedford County.
Right.
Tell us about what it was like to grow up in that community.
Okay. Well, as I say, it was the only thing there was a grocery store and a church, and it was a good farmland type of community. There'd been good farmland there. It was settled, by the early settlers in the early 1800s, late 1700s. It was fairly good farmland. There had been some fairly prosperous people there in the community over the years, mostly, of course, all farming. But as I said, there was no electricity. The house that I grew up with was a 4-room L-shaped house that we had the kitchen, and we had the dining room, which was where the boys slept, and we had the front room, the living room, which we had the fireplace where we all spent our time, and where Mother and Daddy's bed was, and then the front room was the girls' bedroom, and so that made up the 4-room house. As I say, there was no running water. The water was provided by a dug well that was out in front of the house that we got water from by having a chain on a pulley and dropping the bucket down and dipping it up and chaining it back up and taking it to the bucket in the kitchen that was used for drinking water and everything else that we use water for.
Were your family members pretty self-sufficient on the farm?
Yes, it definitely was. We grew, of course, big gardens. Mother canned a lot of stuff. We killed hogs for meat, mostly. Occasionally, Daddy would kill a calf or a lamb for mutton, but we had to. There just wasn't much money to spend. We had a little cotton money in the fall, and Daddy sold a little milk to buy staples, stuff that you had to buy at the store, flour. We did a lot of that by raising the wheat and having it crushed. But we were not completely, but I'd say 75% self-sufficient.
Were you close to some of your brothers and sisters growing up?
Yes. The two oldest in the family were girls, Mary Lee and Evelyn, and then next was James and Robert, and immediately before then me. So it was James and Robert that I was immediately always trying to keep up with. Of course, Robert was 2 years older than me. James was 4 years older than me, and so I always had trouble keeping up. But I tried and did my best to keep up and do everything they did.
All right. Now, did you all have to work from an early age on the farm?
Yes.
What kind of jobs did
we
you have?
always had, we'd always have 4 or 5 cows. Each one of us had a cow we had to milk every morning, every night. We had to bring in wood for the cook stove, the kitchen, also a fireplace for heating during the winter. And that we always had jobs to do. Right.
Do you remember when electricity became available?
It was in 47 or 48. In other words, I was born in 34. I was either 13 or 14 years old when electricity became available.
Did that make a big change?
Very big change. Very big change. It not only we'd have electric lights before then. The only lights we had was the old coal oil lights, or then you could get a Aladdin lamp, which would give some more light. But then the electricity gave the lights that you could really see, and it gave Mother electricity to have a hot plate to cook some on the hot plate, electric plate, rather than having to build up the wood stove, and also to have an electric iron to iron with, rather than having to put it in the fireplace to warm it up to iron, this type of thing, yeah.
You became financially independent by the time you got to high school. How in the world did you do that?
Well, just about as far back as I can remember, I'd always devised some ways to make money. One of the early ways I made money was our place was located along the river, and fishermen would come in by our house, going back to the back of the place where there was shoals. The red horse and suckers fish would spawn each spring, and and they would come by our house to going back to our field. Well, it was a private road, but as far as I concerned, it was like a public road because everybody had free access to come up through there. Well, we had a gate that separated our yard part from the other part of the farm, and I would see some of the fishermen coming, and I got to know the ones that would be good tippers, and I would run and open the gates for them, and they would give me tips of maybe 2 or 3 pennies or a nickel or dime, that. And then I got to digging worms, where I would dig worms and sell to the fishermen that was coming up. And then, by the time I got 8 or 9 or 10 years old, we were working for some of the neighbor farms, digging potatoes or doing things that they would want to done. And then we were making like $1 a day or something like that, $1.50 a day. And then when I got to, the summer I was 15 years old, is my first what we call public job. Public job was any job other than working on a farm. And that was a job doing some construction work in the carpenter work. And as I was, the year I was 15 years old, me and my brother Robert got a job for Mr. Alan Cartwright, who was helping him and putting in indoor bathrooms for Texaco service stations. And we were working 60 hours a week, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And I was making 75 cents an hour, and that was all money without any deducts, and I was making $45 a week, and that was the most money that I ever thought existed. And I, started buying. After that, I started working construction work most every summer during the summers. Now and even during the school year, if somebody had a neighbor farmer had work to be done and wanted to hire me to work, I'd stay out of school and do work. Really, there was no hesitation. It was considered excusable to stay out of school if you were working on the farm.
You say that at an early age you became very frugal. Why was that, and have you retained that habit?
Well, yeah, I think so. I guess I've considered that. I became frugal because I didn't have much money to spend, made it go as far as it would, and now I don't mind spending money for things that I think are worthwhile and are pleasurable, but I don't want to throw my money around very, very much now.
When you were a young fella, you were given the nickname Rab. How did that come about?
Okay, our next door neighbor to the east of us was Mr. Ollie Robinson. And he and my daddy often swapped work on the farm. They would help each other gather corn, for instance. And when I was, I'm sure before I started school, less than 6 years old, I was always with them. I wasn't really doing any work, but I was with them. And when we would go to the field, they'd gather the wagon full of corn and have to go back to the barn to unload it. And as we went back to the field, I would want to drive the horses, and I would insist on holding the reins. And the horses knew where to go by themselves, but I would pull on one or the other, and I would occasionally pull the horses off of the road. And Mr. Al Robinson said I was like Peter Rabbit in the briar patch. I was getting out of the road over in the briar patch. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, that's where that got started, and it got shortened down to Rab.
What did you learn from each of your parents that has most influenced you during the rest of your life?
Well, my daddy was, as I say, he only finished the 8th grade, but I'm convinced that he had a very intelligent mind. He could, for instance, when we were in high school, we started studying algebra. Well, he'd never heard of algebra, but he could work an algebra problem just by pure logic. And I'm convinced that he was that he had a superior mind. And another thing that I think my daddy, and one thing that I like to think I inherited from him was to be a judge of character. He could judge people character. It'd be somebody come in and move in the community that would, you know, be popular and make a big splash for a while. And Dad'd say, I don't think there's much to him. You know, he just, and he'd usually turn out to be right, or something like that. My mother, she was I don't think she had as much natural intelligence as my dad, but she was very loving, very caring, and very humble. And she worked hard with what she had to do with what she did. I mean, you know, with washing all the clothes, the men's clothes on a wash tub, and hanging them out on the clothesline and that type of thing that she did. And I mean, she was washing dirty work clothes, overalls, shirts, and baby diapers and all that. And, you know, after me, there was 4 more children that came along. And just the hard work and I guess the perseverance that came in through her.
And I think when they got to the 9th child, they used the name James again, didn't they?
They used Jim, yeah, right, yeah. Jim Larry. They thought he would be called Larry, he'd been called Jim, while my other brother was called James.
You were 7 years old when you and some of your schoolmates in school went to listen to a radio broadcast of President Roosevelt's speech declaring war against Japan. How did World War II impact the small community in which you grew up?
Okay, that is a very good question, and it leads me into a lot of things that happened during World War II. Remember, Halls Mill community was 5 or 6 miles off of paved road. Very little activity going on the gravel road, dirt road, so to speak. Well, all at once, about 1942, the Army conducted maneuvers in the place next to us, Mr. Hall Robinson's place. They also got over on our place. Well, the first thing we knew, we woke up one morning and there was soldiers all over our place, all over the road. The jeeps and trucks and peeps was running up and down the road, creating more excitement than we knew it ever even existed. And that was, and also the fact that my uncle William, who was Daddy's younger brother, was just about ripe age to go into service. And Daddy knew that he would probably be drafted, which he was. But Daddy was listening to, the only radio communication he had, he always took the paper, took the Nashville, Tennessee, and he was very well informed, but the only radio he had devised a crystal set radio, which could be operated without electricity. You just take a magnetic coil, and it would, and I'm not going to try to explain how it worked, but it did. You could take the magnetic coil and could be able to pick up the sound waves, and then with the right type of amplifier with headsets, and then you had to get the right frequency. He could pick it up on the headsets. Well, he was listening. He was expecting war. He was expecting us to get into the war because of what was going on in Europe, and he was listening over his headset when he heard that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, and it was back at Moeller School, the one-room country schoolhouse that we were going, that our teacher was Miss Lee and Shern, who was a very good teacher. And she let us out and took us next door to the Boyce's house. They had a radio that was run off of a car battery, I think. And we knew, Miss Shern knew that Roosevelt was going to give his speech. And we all went over to the Boyce house and listened to the Roosevelt make his speech about the vet which will live in infamy, and so forth. And sure enough, my Uncle William was drafted. He went all the way through the African campaign, Sicily, Angelo Beachhead up through Italy, and I don't think he ever got into. He wasn't in the Normandy, but he got through and never got seriously hurt, never got killed, never got wounded.
Did the Army continue to do maneuvers in the vicinity?
No, that lasted that one summer. The next thing that happened was that across the river, in the 18th, they established a bum gunning range. That was in 1943, I believe, and they came in, and by eminent domain or threat of eminent domain, they took over the people's property during the middle of the year after they had planted their crops, corn and cotton, and so they paid the farmers for their corn and cotton crop. I don't know what, probably wasn't very much, but then the fall came around, and they sold that cotton and corn crops to the neighbor farmers who wanted to buy it. And my daddy bought two tracts that was across the river that was in the bum gunning range, and it consisted of 8 acres. Well, Daddy and my 2 older sisters, 2 older brothers, and me set out picking that cotton that fall. I guess that was the summer I was either 9 or 10 years old, and traditionally school was let out a month for cotton picking. In addition to the month of that, we stayed out another month. So we picked cotton for 2 consecutive months. That would have been the year I was in the 4th grade, and that was the year that Moeller School. I hadn't told you about Moeller School, but it was the one-room country schoolhouse that it was about 3 miles from our house that we walked to every day, and that was, for a little boy of 6 years old, that's pretty hard. Me trying to keep up with the rest of them then. But that's where I got my first 4 years of education. And incidentally, I think I had 4 pretty good years of education, because I had 2 sisters and 2 brothers older than me, and they were in classes ahead of me. And when the teacher was allowing one grade to recite, the others didn't have anything to do, so I would sit there and listen, and I was trying to listen to what my brothers and sisters were learning, because I believed that I was entitled to know everything they did, and so I learned a lot ahead of my time through that method.
So you started at Moeller School, and then where did you go after the 4 years there?
And we went to it was a community high school at Unionville, Tennessee. It's the name of it's Community, but we always called it Unionville. We had to go there in the 5th grade, starting in the 5th grade.
Right. How did you do in high school, and what activities did you get involved in?
Well, I did all right. I did not excel in high school because I didn't apply myself. As I say, I would, if the opportunity came up for me to stay out of school and work, I worked. So it was a lot of times that I just would be out of school for maybe a week at a time, gathering corn or picking cotton for neighbors that I could do. That I was making money, but I could pass, and that was basically what I was looking for at that time. So I really did not excel in the last 4 years of elementary school or high school.
Did you get involved in any sports?
Yeah, of course, Unionville didn't have football. It had baseball and basketball. I tried to play basketball. I wasn't any good. I didn't have, as my coach told me one time, my muscles had been developed lifting farm equipment rather than sports related. It sort of hurt my feeling, but I know he was right. And I did not, I was never very athletically inclined. I did love to play baseball, and I could play baseball just by determination and trying. And so I played baseball 4 years at high school there, and then went on to Martin College, where I was playing baseball at Martin College down in Pulaski when pulled a cartilage in my knee that was never repaired, and that in effect wound up my playing days.
All right. Going back to the farm, what's the river that your farm was on?
Duck River.
All right.
Duck River.
And you mentioned you worked in corn and cotton. How hard is it to do those jobs? How hard is it to pick cotton?
Oh man, you got to get down on your knees and get with it and bend your back. It was just a question of picking one bow at a time and putting it in a sack and drag it behind you. You know, a good cotton picking man could say pick 150 pounds a day, and we got paid by the pound, maybe a penny a pound that we picked. And then you know, the times I was picking like 75, 80, or 100 pounds a day or something like that, making $1 a day maybe if I picked 100 pounds. Yeah.
Back when World War II started, I believe you had a neighbor that was helping out some of the soldiers, and the Army came to confront the neighbor.
It's my daddy.
Oh, it's your daddy?
Yeah, my daddy. They, as I say, they were really camped on the adjacent neighbor, but they would come by our house going to the river, and they would stop and ask to get fresh water to drink. And my daddy was giving them fresh water to bucket. And one of the officers came and told my daddy that he wasn't supposed to be giving those soldiers fresh water. They were supposed to make out on what they had. And my daddy said, well, as long as I've got water and there's a thirsty soldier come and ask me for it, I'm going to give it to him. And he did. And then this is one thing I was about to forget, but one of the soldiers had a little dog with a little store-bought dog box. And he left it with us, me and my brothers. Said he could no longer keep up with it, and he wanted to have it a good home. So that is a little, I don't know, a little feist dog. I don't think it was thoroughbred, but it was a good little dog, and it lived for ripe old age there at our house, and stayed on for many years.
Even after it was injured?
Yes. Yeah, he got in front of my daddy's sickle mower, pull mower, and like to cut one of his hind legs almost off and cut the other one. And we didn't know what happened to him. He went missing. And 2 or 3 days later, he finally drug up under the house. And of course, we didn't take him to the veterinary or anything. He just laid on the house, and we fed him and watered him. And he finally recovered. And even though he couldn't run good on his back feet, he was still a good squirrel dog, and he could hunt. And Sport was a great dog, really.
Did you see any German prisoners of war?
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. Excuse me there. That has to be one of the exciting events of my early life. As I say, when we picked that cotton that my daddy had bought over in the bum gunning range, it was in the same field as a cornfield, and the German POWs were being housed at Tullahoma, Camp Forest, and they would bring some of those German POWs out to gather corn. And I understand now, I didn't know then, but part of those POWs were captured at the end of the African campaign when Rommel's army was captured, and it was decided between Roosevelt and Churchill that since England was a small island nation, that the German POWs would be housed in America, and they were determined to abide by the Geneva Convention rules of war, partly because they wanted to, and partly because they knew that some of the American and British airmen were being shot down over Germany, and they wanted to get as humane treatment for them as possible. Well, they were supposed to give them some work to do, so that was part of their work, that they were coming out out in the countryside to gather corn. And so we were right in the field next to those POWs. And the military people tell my daddy, said, now, they're not going to harm you, they are harmless, but don't talk to them, don't say anything to them. and we would never. Oh, I'd say I never got within maybe 50 yards of them where they were working, but no closer than that. Okay. But you know, they were. That was quite an experience, and I recall several years later, there was a television story where one of the German POWs who had been stationed, had been assigned to Camp Forest at Tullahoma, had gone back to Germany and was a successful businessman, and he was over here as a tourist, and he was visiting the Middle Tennessee area, and he was talking about how well he'd been treated and how good he thought the countryside was, how pretty it was, and everything. Of course, I got another story I won't go into about your granddaddy that housed some POWs there in Murray County.
That's right.
Which I've been concerned with too.
Ed, you mentioned that that you played baseball some at Unionville School and then at Martin College, but you had more activity involving baseball.
Yeah, there had been a history of baseball in the community because my daddy had played baseball with I'm talking about real country ball. You know, you get up a team, play another community, and there had been baseball played on my daddy's place there by a church league, Luther League, when I was in the late 40s. And then when I went to Martin College and hurt my knee, I came back and there was several youngsters around Hall's Mill there that was the right age and were good potential baseball players, named Randy Crowell, who went on to pitch the top pitcher for UT for 2 years, his junior and senior year, and then some more community leaders that was the nucleus of the team. And so they said, well, you can't play, so you need to organize and manage it. So I did that, and I managed it for 6 years during the summers where I was going to college and even through 1 year of law school. Every summer I would go back and get that team together, and we would play. We started out, I just wanted to play the community teams like I was talking about, but you know, those communities, they didn't have a baseball team. And so it got to the place that we were having to play county seat teams like Fayetteville, Pulaski, Murfreesboro, Tullahoma, and that type of teams to get games. So we started recruiting pretty well countywide to have our baseball team to be able to play that kind of team.
You got to play against a future major leaguer too.
Yeah, Claude Osteen was the one that was most. We were playing a team called Old Berlin. It's on the road between Franklin and Lewisburg, and it was really a country cow pasture type field. And Claude Osteen must not have been over 14, 15 years old. And we went over there to play Old Berlin, and he was playing first base. And they started a pitcher who had on bib overalls, and this old boy with bib overalls, he was throwing the ball pretty hard at first, but of course he was out of condition, and after about the third inning we started hitting him pretty good, and he was walking, and they brought Claude Osteen in from first base to pitch, and it was obvious to me from the very beginning that there was some unusual talent that he possessed. He was left-handed. He had the big curve balls, big sweeping curve ball that we couldn't see much less hit, and he couldn't get the ball over the plate though. So he was walking us, and we kept on scoring on him with that, and they finally put him back on first base. But as I say, I knew that I had witnessed some unusual talent because he was a good hitter. I don't think we got him out of the bat that time, and we certainly never knocked the ball past him at first base. He caught everything that came by.
Some people may not remember him, but what did he go on to do?
At one time, he was with the Los Angeles Dodgers, was in the starting rotation with Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, and Don Sutton, 3 Hall of Famers that he was in the starting rotation. He never became a Hall of Famer. He wasn't as good as them, but he pitched for several years and was pretty slick.
Do you still follow baseball? And if you do you have a favorite team?
Oh yeah, I've always been interested in baseball. Right now, I guess I follow the Atlanta Braves more than anybody, but because it's it's easy to pick up on television, and I've always liked the Atlanta Braves. But I still like the St. Louis Cardinals, Boston Red Sox, and a lot of the teams. I'm just an anti-Yankee man. Anybody that can beat the Yankees, I'm usually in favor of.
I believe I'm right that none of your 8 siblings went on to college after school. You did. Why do you think you did?
I'm not sure. I think it was a lot of luck, just being at the right place at the right time. When I was finishing up high school, my senior year, I didn't have anything in mind to do. My older brother, Robert, Bob, and Lester Pewitt that I ran around with, they were in the Navy, so I was sort of lost. Anybody to run around, and I was looking for something to do. And then Dean Glenn Mingledorf from Martin College came to Unionville High School recruiting class, and he gave a presentation to the whole class, and then said if anybody wanted to talk privately, come over to the office. And I didn't have anything to lose, so I went over and talked to him, and he, for the first time, convinced me that I might be able to go to college financially. I knew I could not expect any financial help from my family. Of course, they wouldn't expect it. So that was the first time that I ever thought that I might be able to make it by working and saving my money in the summers, and then getting workshop and scholarships at Martin to be able to do it. And that was one of my terms, one of my times when perseverance paid off. I persevered, and with the luck and I don't know how to describe it, but there was a banker in Pulaski named Mr. Thurman Smith with Union Bank that my second year that loaned me $600 on my signature to go to Martin my second year, that I was able to pretty much go to college on.
Were you even legally an adult then?
No, I was not. Okay. And the same thing about it, he put the money in my checking account and filled out a note and told me the next time I went home to get my daddy to sign it, which I did. But the money was already in my account before I
Now,
went.
had you ever before visited Martin College? Where was Martin College, and what kind of college was it?
Well, it was a junior college, just 2 years. It was at Pulaski, Tennessee. No, I had not visited there before I went.
All right.
No.
While you were at Martin College, you influenced in an interesting way the career of your friend Jimmy Martin from back home. How did that come about?
Yeah, that's one of the outstanding stories, I think. Jimmy was a good old boy, a friend of mine in high school, and he was obviously pretty intelligent, but he was lazy. I mean, he just he didn't study any courses that he didn't have to, any hard courses that he didn't have to take. He didn't play any kind of sports, and he was just sort of lazy. And he once made a comment that every time he got the urge to exercise, he went and laid down and it passed over. Well, at that time, through high school, math and science had been my best subjects. When I went to Martin, I really didn't know what I was going to study, but I thought it would be something in the math and science area. So I took all of the math and science courses I could the freshman year. Jimmy didn't. He took sociology, easiest courses he could get, and so forth. Well, it came up second year, and I wanted to take physics, and I signed up to take physics. And the dean, academic dean, was Chuck Havens, called me in and said, you're the only student in the whole student body that signed up to take physics, and we can't teach physics to one student. I said, well, I understand that, but would you teach it for two? And he said, yes. So I went to my old buddy Jimmy Martin, and I said, Jimmy, you need to take physics. He said, well, I don't know what it is, but if you say so, I will. So he signed up. He and I were the two students in the course that was taught by Mrs. Willard Rayburn. Just right, I mean, she sat here, one of us on each side, whole semester taking physics. And you can imagine that was a great course. It was just two of us. Well, when we first started, Jimmy, he didn't have the math background to work the problems. We would study the text work on it, and then we'd run an experiment, and then we would take the results of the experiment and calculate it. It's supposed to come out reasonably close to what the result was. Well, Jimmy couldn't work the problems, but we worked together, and I could do the math. Well, it wasn't long till he started beating me in the grades. I mean, he caught on to it just like duck to water, and he immediately became interested in physics, and he wound up going to next year after he got out of Martin. He went to Peabody, and that was separate from Vanderbilt at that time, but he was able to take a lot of the math courses at Vanderbilt, and he did well. He excelled in them. And then his senior year, he was able to enroll at Vanderbilt, and was graduated from Vanderbilt. And then he got he got interested in the co-oping with the Atomic Energy Commission out of Oak Ridge, and he was able to go to Vanderbilt 1 year on his master's, and then he was called up to in the public health service, and they were doing the atomic testing out west, and he was sent out there to do the testing on the fallout of the atomic bombs that they were exploding out west. And then he wound up going to one of the islands when they were doing that. And the end result was he went back to Washington, D.C. and worked for the Public Health Service, and they sent him to the University of Michigan, where he was able to complete his master's degree and then get his PhD degree from University of Michigan. He went back and worked enough in Washington to get a retirement, and then went back to the University of Michigan and taught in the nuclear physics in the graduate school PhD course until he was able to retire from there a few years ago.
And wrote one of the textbooks.
Wrote the textbooks that he uses to, and he is his specialty is, and he gave me an article that was written up to him by the University of Michigan. His specialty is the detection and measurement of low-level radiation. In other words, he could tell you how much radiation you get out of X-rays and that type of thing.
When you went off to Martin College from Bedford County, had you ever been away from home much before?
No.
Did you live on campus?
Yeah, I lived in the dorm. The men's dorm was across the street from the women's dorm, where we ate all of our meals in the women's dorm. But one of my Bill Reid, who I had known at Unionville in the 7th or 8th grade, his daddy was a Methodist preacher, and he'd been preacher at Unionville while we were in 7th, 8th grade, and they got transferred, and his family was living in Tracy City at that time. Well, anyway, he and Bill and I wound up as roommates at Martin College that first year.
Now, one of your first inclinations towards a career in law was when you were at Martin College, and you went to the Giles County Jail to provide religious services to inmates. What made you think about law then?
Well, you know, I don't really know how I got into that job, but I think I wound up filling out the job for somebody else. It's usually one of the preacher students, divinity students would have that job. Well, I wound up doing it, and those inmates, they always seem to be very attentive if it's nothing but just break the monotony of being able to get out of the jail life. But it just occurred to me that that really, you know, they could listen to preachers talk and give sermons till they were blue in the face, and they wasn't going to change their life. What they really needed was somebody who could make a difference, more like a lawyer, and that was one of the reasons that I started getting pointed in that direction.
Now, Martin was a 2-year college, and then you finished your college career at a Lutheran college in Ohio. How did you get to Wittenberg College in Ohio, and why did you want to go up there?
Well, that's a good question too. 1954, the year I was graduating from or finishing up at Martin, was the year the Brown versus Board of Education was decided. Supreme Court outlawed segregation in schools. Well, I was a typical Southerner. I knew segregation was wrong. I didn't know anything to do about it. I just felt like that as being a Southerner, I was really straddled with the situation we had and couldn't do anything about it. But I had some idea that the people up north had some answers to it and knew how to handle it better than us Southerners. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to go to a school up north. And then there was a Lutheran influence too. I had grown up as a Lutheran, and one of the preachers at our church, Richard Smith, had gone to Wittenberg, and he was instrumental in talking me into going to Wittenberg. So I went there. I had to stay out a year and work to pay back Mr. Thurman Smith the $600 I had borrowed from him before I incurred any more indebtedness, which I did. And that winter I stayed out, I worked for an engineer and did mostly drafting and calculation work. And that's when I decided it was more fun to deal with people than it was figures and numbers too. Right. So when I went to Wittenberg, I was fully convinced that I was going to be a lawyer.
All right. I think we can take a break.
Okay, well,
did you know any lawyers growing up or before you decided to go to law school?
No, I really didn't. No, there was some lawyers in Nashville that I knew of, but I really didn't know them personally. We weren't associated closely with any lawyers, no.
How did you select Vanderbilt Law School?
After I finished college at Wittenberg, I had to stay out a year again to catch up on my finances, and I got a job working at the Arnold Engineering Development Center over Tullahoma for a year, and that was a blessing. But during that year, I decided that I would. Well, no, wait a minute. Let me back up. The year before I went to, the year between my third and fourth year of college, the summer that I was home from Wittenberg, I decided that I would look around for a law school to go to, and I knew more about Cumberland Law School at Lebanon. That was where it seemed like most lawyers had gone. And so I think I borrowed my brother's car somewhere, and I went over to Lebanon. The Charles Havens, who had been academic dean at Martin, was over at Cumberland College, and was restarting Cumberland College, which had been down for some time. That law school kept going, but Cumberland College had closed, and Charles Havens was the dean of the college. So I went to see him first, and he sent me over to the law school, which Judge Carruthers, I forget, can't remember his first name now. But,
Sam.
Sam Carruthers was the dean, and I went over to his office, and it really turned out that he was not only the dean, he was most of the law school. He was the only full-time teacher they had. They had some adjunct teachers who were lawyers from downtown Lebanon, but Mr. Sam, I don't know, somebody told me about him, but I wasn't impressed with Mr. Sam. And I immediately left Lebanon and drove to Nashville and got up to Dean Wade's office and saw him. And I was tremendously impressed with Dean Wade. Dean Wade told me that at that time there was not any exams required for entrance into the law school, and that I could get in after 3 years of college if I wanted to. And he pretty much assured me that, although I'd have to make an application, he pretty much assured me that I could get in. But I felt at that time I was more idealistic, I guess, than I should have been, but I felt like I should finish college before I went to law school. So I decided to go back to Wittenberg and finish up my senior year, which I did. And I was able to work pretty good job there, and I came out without too much indebtedness, except that I had been able to I borrowed some money from the National Defense Scholarship Fund, and I didn't have enough money to start the Vanderbilt Law School, so I stayed out and worked a year at AEDC. That's where I'm back then, and so I had able to save up enough money the year I was working before I entered Vanderbilt Law School that I didn't have to work the first year. And that was when I entered the law school in the fall of '58. And that was, I thought that was the most exciting thing that I'd ever encountered, really. And I look back on it and I think my 3 years at Vanderbilt was probably the most challenging and probably the most productive 3 years of my life, really, of what I was able to accomplish and what I was able to do the 3 years I was there. Yeah.
Who were some of the more memorable professors that you had in law school?
Well, I credit the quality of Vanderbilt Law School at that time to Dean Wade. Of course, we were still, that was before any separate law school was built. We were the last class that graduated before they moved into the new law building. And we were on the third and fourth floor of Kirkland Hall. And the facilities were not attractive at all. And they did not have very many students. In other words, I think there was only about 75 of us that started out in the first year together, and there's 56 of us graduated. But in addition to Dean Wade himself, Paul Hartman, who I'm happy to say is looking at me right now, I hope he's pleased, was our contracts teacher, and I would have to say he's probably the best teacher I ever had.
And that's because we're sitting in a Hartman conference room and you're looking at his portrait on the wall.
Right, sure am. In addition to Dean Wade and Dutch, and we called him Dutch after we got through, Professor Hartman, they had Eddie Morgan. Eddie Morgan, that's one thing that Dean Wade had started doing was hiring the scholars, well-known scholars that that had been retired, had been required to retire from some of the prestigious Eastern schools like Harvard and Yale and Columbia and so forth. And Eddie Morgan was there, and he had been an outstanding scholar in evidence and procedure. And he taught us first year's of civil procedure, and I frankly couldn't understand what he was saying. I didn't get much out of his civil procedure course, but he taught evidence the second year, and that was outstanding. You could tell what he was trying to teach in evidence, and I would have to say he's probably the smartest man I ever studied. And in addition, we had, Dean Wade had gotten Professor Elliott Cheatham, who was the outstanding in the field of legal ethics. And he had written his book on legal ethics, and he taught us, I think it was second year before we were there, before he taught the profession of law course. And he was the finest old gentleman I ever known, really. So I would say out of the four law school professors, Dean Wade was probably the best scholar I ever knew. Ball Hartman was the best teacher I had. Professor Morgan was the smartest man I ever knew, and Professor Cheatham was the finest old gentleman I ever knew. I'd say that. But in addition to well, and then we had other teachers like Troutman and Sanders and Smedley, and some of them that did all right, but I never did think they were in the category of the big four that I was talking about.
What experience did you have in Professor Hartman's contracts course at Vanderbilt that caused you to never again go to class unprepared?
Well, we all, he was the self-appointed he put it on. He took it on himself to. He'd say, "Harden your skin. You got to be tough skin to be good lawyers." And he would call on. He used the case method that he'd call on somebody, and if he was unprepared, sometimes he would keep them on his feet and embarrass them unmercifully. And so I always tried to stay prepared, but you never knew how many cases he was going to cover. So one night it was a Saturday morning course. We had partied Friday night before. He was at the party. I had about 3 cases briefed ahead, but he started ripping through the cases, and I knew that I was going to be vulnerable, that it could be called on, so I started trying to read ahead the next case, and it was Hadley versus Baxendale, which was a case of the broken shaft on the Old English case about where the mill shaft was broken, and the question of whether or not they could get unanticipated damages that was not anticipated, loss of profits for the mill. Well, I had read enough to know that it involved a mill shaft. Sure enough, he called on me. I stood up and he said, "Well, Mr. Lawwell, what's this case about?" I said, "About a mill shaft, sir." And he asked me 2 or 3 more questions. I think he knew from the beginning that I hadn't read it, but he asked me 2 or 3 questions that required yes and no answers, and I was able to guess the right answers. But finally he lowered the boom on it and said, "Mr. Lawwell, you just got shafted." And anyway, he let me out easier than he could have. And anyway, that was oddly enough, it wasn't as dramatic. But the same morning, I had Professor Sanders' course in constitutional law, and I got called on unprepared in his class the same morning. And that was the only 2 times I ever got called on unprepared.
One of your law professors, Professor Morgan, told the students that lawyers don't know anything. They are only experts in relevance.
Right.
What did that mean to you in your career?
Well, it actually is something that most lawyers tend to forget, but I think they ought to remember it. When you think you've been practicing a while, you think you know the answers to the law, and you really don't look it up like you should. And that's where you start giving opinions off the top of your head that are oftentimes wrong. And what he was saying was that all you need to do is to know what's relevant to be able to know where to look to find the law. And he's absolutely right to that.
What lifelong friendships did you make in law school?
You know, in addition to those professors that I've talked about, I think the people that influenced me more may have been my fellow students, and I'm talking about people like Jim Bass, Al Knight, Joe Richardson, Larry Creason, Gil Merritt. Gil was not in our class, but he had gone to Harvard one year, and his dad got killed in a plane wreck, and he had to transfer back to Nashville to help his mother carry on his daddy's business, and so he wound up having to take a lot of the freshman courses with us. So he ran around with Bass and Knight, and Bob Covington was one of our classmates, very instrumental, and Ed Blank, who you knew very well, practiced in Columbia, and was a good friend of Jim Bass, and I got to studying with Ed and Jim there in a big classroom, and that was very beneficial to study with Jim. It became obvious from the beginning that it was going to be between Jim and Bob Covington as to who would be the Founders Medalist, and they were Nick and Tuck for a long time. But and I think Bob Covington I believe he'd gone to Yale, had a tremendous vocabulary, had a good mind, but he didn't have the he really wasn't as didn't have the self-discipline that Jim Bass did. Jim was just focused on everything he was doing. He knew when to study, he knew when to party, and Jim is still one of my best friends, one of my real heroes today.
Tell us about the time you and your buddies in law school were out for steak and beer one night, and what happened.
Okay. In addition, one of the friends I have mentioned so far was Jack Fawcett. Jack was from New York. His daddy and uncle owned and ran the Fawcett Publishing Company. Jack came to Vanderbilt Law School because his dad said that they got sued so much they needed a lawyer, in-house lawyer. And he had got to know his future wife from Louisville, Kentucky, a delightful girl named Betsy. And anyway, it was our second year of law school, and Jack and Betsy had gotten married, I think, but summer after the first year, and they were living in a duplex out in West End. And Betsy was scheduled to deliver a child toward the end of the year, and her dad was a doctor in Louisville, and she had already moved to his house in Louisville. And so Jack was there batching by himself, and he invited Al Knight and Joe Richardson from Chattanooga, that became lawyers for the Luptons, who had the Coca-Cola money, invited us out to his house to drink beer and eat steaks. So we were out there, and Jack was cooking the steaks on a grill, and they were talking about how bad shape I was in. I was still smoking then, and they were saying how I couldn't run a mile, and then we got to talking about somebody suggested I couldn't run a mile in 7 minutes, and I knew nothing about track whatsoever. I just knew there was a fellow named Bannister who had ran a 4-minute mile, made big news, and I thought, well, if he could run a mile in 4 minutes, I surely could do it in 7 minutes. And so it wasn't a bet, but Joe Richardson, he was sadistic enough that he didn't think I could do it, but if I did, I'd probably get sick, which I did. But anyway, it was questioned, he put up $25 for me to do it. And I think Al Knight put in 10, so they got up to $35, and I accepted the challenge. And this was probably 9:30 at night. So we had to start working on the ground rules. I needed time to get in better shape, so we set the time at 11 o'clock around the old football stadium at Vanderbilt. Before they rebuilt it, there was a cinder track that ran under the bleachers there. You had to go around it 4 times and about a third around it the other time. So as we were talking about the ground rules, we decided we was going to do it at 11 o'clock that night. And I had, you know, I hadn't had nothing but street shoes and clothes. And Al, he had a pair of track shoes. He lived out out toward the Green Hills area. He went out there and got the track shoes, and they were too big for me, but I wore them anyway because it's better than the street shoes. And then somebody came up with a stopwatch. Well, I knew I had to have somebody I could trust to keep time, so I called Bob Covington, that I felt like I could trust him to come out as the timekeeper. And Al and Joe and them started calling other people around the law school to tell them this event was going to take place. They even called a girl I was dating then. I'm glad she didn't show up. But anyway, we were set at the appointed time and place, and I had figured out in my mind where I needed to be each round, and I told Bob to call off each round where I was time-wise. And I was doing very well for the first 2 or 3 rounds. And I knew about the end of the last round I was running out of gas. And I came around that 4th round, and I was just about spent. But I knew I had another about a quarter of a track to go to make it. So that's when I kicked in all the perseverance I had, and I was able to make it in 6:58. And I fell out on the ground. I didn't get sick a minute. Joe Richard, he was disappointed. He said he ain't getting sick. I did get sick later on. Anyway, I collected my $35 and put it in my pocket. And the final chapter of this story was the next week we had a class under Hartman, and he had thrown out a hypothetical, and he had asked 2 or 3 different students to answer to it, and nobody had given the answer he wanted. So he says, "All right, Mr. Lawwell, how about you taking a run at this?" And the class just broke up. I mean, everybody knew about it. The class broke up, and that was one event that I'd probably known more in law school for than any other thing. I ran this 7-minute mile.
During law school, you and Al Knight took summer law clerkships with the Navy in Washington, D.C. What did you gain from that experience?
Well, that was a very useful summer. We were able to we got a room in an old rooming house there at George Washington University, and I was assigned to work in the Pentagon in the law office of the legal advisor to the comptroller of the Navy. It was a 2-man law office, and of course I was clerk. Al was assigned down to the Navy shipyard, and I think he had to do more work than I did. I didn't do much work, but the manager of the senior partner in that the head of the 2-man firm, he told me right to begin with that the main purpose of that program was a recruitment for lawyers to come back to work for the Navy Department afterwards. And part of my experience would be to see what was going on in the law office, but also to see what was going on in Washington. So he said anytime I felt like I wanted to take off and go to the Supreme Court building or the Capitol or something to do so, which I did. I just spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time around the Supreme Court building, around the Capitol that time, and it was enjoyable. Al and I had we had a good time. We saw a whole lot of baseball games. Did several things that I probably never will do again, and I think it would be able to spend the summer in Washington D.C. and break even financially was great. But I also knew that I did not want to go back and live in Washington D.C. or to practice law for the government. So after I was offered a job, I respectfully declined to go back to practice. And I think I got an insight into a little bit about how Washington, D.C. works with the bureaucracy that's going on and things, and I can just imagine that it's magnified now compared to what it was then, and I can have a little bit better understanding about how you can't get anything done as far as the politics is concerned.
I believe once Al Gore's sister took you to Capitol Hill for a visit.
Yes, Nancy. Nancy was in Vanderbilt undergraduate school, same time I was in law school, and she dated a lot of law students. I never dated, never had anything to say. I mean, not that I could have, but I was in the crowd with her a lot. We used to drink beer down at Ireland's, and she drank beer down there with us a lot of times. Nancy she was attractive, but she wasn't really raving beauty, I'll say that way. But a lot of law students did date her, including Gil Merritt. And anyway, when we were in Washington that summer, that was before Gil came up. He did come up later on, but it was just Al and I were there. And we got together with Nancy one time, or maybe two or three times, and she took us up to the Capitol Hill, and we went down on the Senate floor. John Kennedy was running for president at that time, and we met him in Church, Senator Church, a lot of the outstanding senators at that time, down on the floor of the Capitol building.
What were your proudest achievements in law school?
Well, of course, I made Order of the Coif, which I was awful proud of. It was barely by the skin of my teeth. There was 56 of us graduated, which meant there would have been 6 places on there, and I made the 6th place, which I was awful proud of. Number 1 was Jim Bass. Number 2 was Bob Code. Number 3 is Al Knight. Number 4 was Jerry Moore, who was CPA from Bowling Green, Kentucky. And number 5 was Bob Banker, who was a lawyer who wound up practicing in St. Petersburg, Florida. So I was awful proud to make the list of 6, make the Order of the Coif.
You started in a small one-room country school in Bedford County, and you went on to graduate in the top 10% of your class at Vanderbilt Law School, and you were a member of the Law Review.
Yes.
How do you account for that level of achievement?
A lot of perseverance, is all I got to say. A lot of hard work, perseverance. I learned to allocate my time efficiently, work when I had to, study when I had to, play when I felt like I had to, and just keep plugging away. So that's one of my themes is perseverance, and that's what I felt like I took.
Did law school prepare you well for the practice of law?
Yes, I could say that. I could say I got out of law school, I was well prepared to practice law. One of the biggest things that you mentioned I hadn't elaborated on was being on the Law Review. We had very stringent rules to follow in writing. We were required to write case notes our second year and an article our third year, and there were strict rules as far as citations and going by the blue book and everything, and that was very very instrumental in me being able to write briefs after I started practicing law and getting ready to do a lot of appellate court work, which we did.
All right. How did you prepare to take and pass the bar exam?
I don't know. We really wasn't too concerned about not passing it. I felt like we could pass it. We should, but it was a lot riding on it. So there were several of us that that stayed in Nashville after we had graduated and took the bar cram course. Judge Harbison taught a course that we had in bar cram course. Joe Richardson stayed around. Al Knight was, of course, and Jim Bass was around studying with us, and we stayed around, and we actually did more playing we did studying. That's when they introduced me to the game of golf pretty well by going out to Richmond and Belle Meade and making fun of me trying to play golf, which I couldn't play at all, and that. But anyway, we did take the bar exam, and I was able to pass. Incidentally, Hugh Shelton Jr. was one of the board of law examiners that I had already decided I'd go and practice with in Columbia, and after I'd taken the bar exam, before he graded the papers, he would not look at any of my handwriting. When I wanted to write any kind of memo, I would dictate to the secretary and she'd type it out and give to him, because he didn't want to be prejudiced at grading my paper by lowering my handwriting.
What options did you consider when you graduated from law school and were looking for full-time work?
I interviewed with a couple of the big firms here in Nashville, Muneer, Herod, Crouch, that, Goodpasture, Carpenter, Dale, and I was offered jobs by each one of them for $300 a month. And, I think that was sort of the going rate, but the Sheltons, I went down and interviewed, and it was a father-son situation. The father was about 70 years old. The son was about 48 years old.
And that's in Columbia.
In Columbia, and they had more business than they could or wanted to take care of, and I thought it was a great opportunity. And so that's the reason when they offered me $400 a month too.
And that was your starting salary?
That was my starting salary, yeah, that's right.
I imagine you've seen a lot of change since you started practicing law as far as the way legal work gets churned out in a law office, technology and such. Can you tell us some of the changes you've seen? Yeah,
when I first started practicing down there was we only had one full-time secretary, Margaret Hughes. She later married Joe Talley, died not too long ago. But she was very efficient, very good. And we dictated to her live. She took shorthand. There was no copying machines that was manageable. There was some of those round stereotype things. I don't know, stenograph, I guess you call them. But anyway, the typing was done with carbon paper. Now we had electric typewriter, but no storage material whatsoever. So and we had no copying machines. So when we did appellate court briefs, and she had to do 5 copies, and she had to have four carbon copies in there. And if she made a mistake and had to erase it, she had to erase it on each carbon. And that's the way it was when we started. We started getting dictaphones. First one I remember we had was a little disc where you would cut you would cut it as you were dictating it, and the secretary could use it to transcribe it. And then we got the tapes that we used to dictate on. And then the copying machine started coming about and made vast improvements for several stages till they got where they are now, of course.
Okay. What was your work day like, your work week like when you started practicing law?
We worked 5 days a week and on Saturday morning. And that Saturday morning that was terrible. I had to go up and but if you wanted to party on Friday nights, you could do it, but you had to know you had to be in court. Judge Ingham was the only judge we had at that time, and he would have Saturday sessions, sort of like we have the Friday sessions now, would be filled with non-jury ex parte things, and sometimes it'd be domestic relations things, and we would almost always have to stay there till 12 or 1 o'clock before we got through on Saturday morning. And I was trying my best to get out to go play golf with Ed Blank and Billy Jack and people that I had known in law school. But we hardly ever, very seldom got out before 12 or 1 o'clock. And then the law office started closing on Saturday morning because the banks started closing on Saturday morning. And really that was the reason when the banks started closing, and the secretaries used that as leverage to quit working on Saturday. So we finally quit working on Saturday morning. And boy, that was a relief.
What was your work day like typically in the office?
I always got to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. I never was late early, and usually we would quit at 4:30. I very seldom missed any day at work. I played golf on the weekends and late after work in the afternoons, but I very seldom took off from work. I was very busy. I mean, from the very beginning. The Sheldons had more work than we could do. One thing I didn't have to worry about acquiring new business. All I had to do was take care of the business they already had, and we had a lot of business that I was busy doing. I never worked a lot of overtime like I hear people talking about working on weekends and at night. I pretty well decided that I could expend most of my energy the 8 hours a day, and I would arrange it so that when it got 4:30 or 5 o'clock, I was ready to go home, and I usually did.
You mentioned Judge Joe M. Ingram, circuit judge in Southern Middle Tennessee, holding court on Saturday morning. I imagine a lot of your cases at the beginning were with Judge Ingram. What do you remember about Judge Ingram?
Judge Ingram was smart, he was well educated, he was scholarly, but he was the most liberal judge that I've ever run against. Anything within the discretion, and he would usually know how far to go. Within judicial discretion, he was coming out as far with the plaintiffs as far as he could go. And a lot of our early cases was defending cases of insurance companies against Jerry Colley, who was representing the plaintiff. And Jerry was one of the finest trial lawyers that I've ever run into. So we had a lot of appellate work to do, and being where we had lost cases at trial level from Judge Ingram with Jerry Colley, and we were able to reverse a lot of them on appeal. But that was really a trying situation, trying jury cases or cases where there was any discretion in front of Judge Ingram.
Did you like Columbia? Was that a good choice for you to practice law?
Yes, I think it has been. Yeah, sure, certainly has. Yeah.
Do you recall your first day at the law office or your first big case you tried?
No, I don't remember the first day at the office. I know that I was thrown in with helping Hugh Shelton Jr. tried jury cases, circuit court cases, almost immediately. It helped working him, and I was trying general sessions courts. We tried a lot of general sessions cases back then. You know, there was small fender bender automobile accidents, and we represented a lot of insurance companies, and we did a lot of defense work, and I did a lot of that early, within the first year or two, I'm sure.
Did you do any work in criminal cases?
I had a couple of sad experiences in criminal work. One of them was in federal court. Judge Frank Gray appointed me to defend this defendant who had defrauded an insurance company over Lewisburg out of about $35,000 by a scheme that he had a tractor trailer truck rig insured, and he had a wreck down in Alabama, and he was able to collect the insurance without paying off the bank's mortgage, what it amounted to. And rather than rather than charging him with regular fraud, they attempted to go in federal court and charge him with mail fraud. And Judge Gray, I had known Judge Gray, and he appointed me to defend this defendant. And when he did, he told me there's some evidence that this man can pay an attorney. So you're free to discuss attorney's fees with him. So we went out to first conference, and I asked him about paying me, and he just flat said, no, you're appointed to represent me, and you've got to represent me, and I don't have to pay you. And I was naive enough that I should have probably gone back and told Judge Gray what happened. He would probably relieve me, but I was naive enough that I didn't. And I spent about 2 hard weeks of research and writing a brief, and ultimately was able to show that he did not use the mails to defraud his clients, that he'd already defrauded them before he used mail. And Judge Gray sustained my defense and dismissed the case. And he told me that I could apply for attorney's fees, which I did. And I think Judge Gray, I believe he awarded me an attorney's fee of $20,000, I think. And I set about trying to collect it. And I did everything I knew to collect it from this defendant. And the only money I ever collected was $5 that his wife sent to me. And I finally gave up on it. And that was a pretty sad experience that I had with representing indigent criminal defendants. And I did some, that was before we had public defenders, and we had to spend our time on the list, and I did some defense work, but I never did like it. In fact, I hated it, really. Never did like it.
How did you learn to be an effective trial lawyer?
Well, first of all, you're assuming that I became an effective trial lawyer, and I'll go along with that assumption. But I think it was, I represented a Farm Bureau Insurance Company, Tennessee Farmers Mutual. From early in the game, I started representing them. And we did a lot of, I did a lot of cases for them. We settled a lot, but we also tried a lot. And I think it was just the experience in doing it. I also think that with my country background, I was able to relate to the juries more so than some of the lawyers could. Not Jerry Colley. Of course, he could relate to anybody. But you know, I think that was one of the things that helped me through my trial of lawsuits is my country background, really, and being able to talk to the jury on their level.
What do you recall about what you would consider your most memorable case?
Probably that inverse condemnation case for Stacy Lunn that was taken by the Saturn Parkway. The Saturn announced they were going to build the plant there in 1985, and there was wild speculation going on about land values and everything, and the big out-of-town speculators were coming in, and one fellow by the name of Pettigrew came in and bought up about all of the land bought about 2/3 of the land that would run all the way from Saturn plant to I-65, and then he was able to cut a deal with the state of Tennessee where he would give the state the right-of-way in exchange for concessions that they would make to enhance the value of the land. And one of the properties that he bought belonged to Stacy Lunn, and Stacy sold it to Pettigrew on credit and had a mortgage, of course, on it. Well, when Pettigrew gave it to the state did not check the title, and so they took the property and started building a highway on it, with Stacy still having the first mortgage on it. Well, by the time he came to us, the road was pretty well under construction, and it had been going for over a year. So we knew our remedy was under the inverse condemnation statute, but you got a 1-year statute of limitation. So we had to overcome that before we could even get in court. And we did that on the theory of the Department of Transportation, the state of Tennessee's staff attorney, whose name is Ward Buckner, had misled Stacy into believing that he was going to be paid without filing a lawsuit. And I knew that was going to be a tough road to get by. And I questioned Stacy about what proof he had. And Stacy Lund was not a very educated man, but he was a very intelligent man. And he had kept all his phone records where he had phone conversations with Ward Buckner about that. And his story was that when he first found out that the state was building a road on property that he had a mortgage on, that he got in touch with Ward Buckner. He was told who to contact. And of course, Buckner said, well, I don't know anything about your mortgage. We'll have to check into it, and I'll get back with you. Well, he did check. He didn't get back. So Stacy called him again. And by then, he knew that Stacy still had the mortgage on the property. And he was saying, well, we're going to make Pettigrew pay you off. And Stacy kept telling him, said, well, he's not paying me. And he finally, according to Stacy, Ward Buckner says, well, we know that you're owed the money, and if Pettigrew don't pay you, then the state will. And it was on that basis that he was misled to get by the statute of limitations. So we filed our inverse condemnation statute, which under that statute you're allowed all of your expenses, including the landowners, is included, all the expenses, including attorney's fees. So I was anticipating what was going to happen, and I had a written contract where we were to receive 40% of the excess of the last offer, which was customary in condemnation proceedings. Well, in this case, the state hadn't offered anything, so we had a contract 40% over and above whatever we was able to recover. And the statute also gives expenses, which included appraisers' fees. And we got 2 reputable appraisers there, locals, to appraise the property. Stacy damaged. Stacy was very intelligent in being able to keep up with all of the properties that had sold in the neighborhood, and he knew comparables himself. So we took Ward Buckner's deposition, and I was anxious to know what he was going to say. And he said that he didn't remember ever talking to Stacy. Well, Stacy had his telephone records to detail the exact times that he had called. He'd have one 1/10 of a minute, which means he had called and not been able to get through. Another where he'd talk 10, 15 minutes, and which coincided with what Stacy said that his conversations with Buckner was. So, in addition to the attorney's fees and appraiser's fees, we had to get we found an error in the description the state had, so we had to get a surveyor to get us the correct description. Well, anyway, we tried that case. Took 2 or 3 days. Condemnation cases are usually about as dull a cases as you can try. But we put Stacy on the stand, and he was the most perfect witness that I've ever seen, in the sense that he was believable, he was intelligent, and knew what he was saying and everything. And he put his own value of what he thought his property was worth. Plus there was a tract that had been cut off that we got full value from on that. Anyway, it came out in my closing argument to the jury. I wrote on the blackboard, what I thought we were entitled to, using Stacy's figures exactly, and down to the penny. And anyway, the jury went out, and they returned a verdict for the exact amount that we had put on the board, including the dollar and the cents. And that was a complete victory. That it was the most. I don't remember the figures, and I shouldn't tell them even if I did remember. But it was the biggest one fee that I ever earned, all from the state of Tennessee. Not a penny of it out of my client's pocket.
Did you enjoy doing land use cases, and did you get more business out of that one?
Yeah, we had some more condemnation cases. We sure did. One of them was Charlie Wolf, which was right across the road there, which Saturn came through. And this was not a litigated case, but I'm gonna say it's the piece of legal business that I handle that I have to believe out of my entire practice is one of the best pieces of legal business that I ever handled, and the one that was most satisfying to me, and that was the purchase of the Foster Place, which is on which the YMCA building is now located, and part of which the apartment buildings are located, and part of it is a vacant field, which Dr. Easlick Daniels still owns. And the reason I got involved in that is because the tract of land butts up on some land behind my house, our house, and Will Dale's house. Will Dale was a lawyer friend of mine who's a neighbor, and we bought some property behind us, 25 acres of it, to keep from being developed. And I had run some cows back there, and the fence between my place and Mrs. Foster's place was not adequate, and our cows was always getting on each other's property, vice versa. And I had gotten to know Mrs. Foster over those cattle situations. Well, excuse me, during this Saturn boom, when everything was so wild as far as speculators and prices up, I had played golf one Saturday afternoon and came home and was cutting the yard, and I had a phone call from Miss Foster's daughter, Suzanne, who lived there, and said, "Mr. Lawwell, come down, Mama's about to sell the farm." So with everything that was going on, I said, well, I'd better go down there. So I got up, went down there. And there's three individuals that I won't name them publicly, but I knew them. They were not what I would call the top realtors in town. And I knew Ms. Foster needed to sell her place, but I wanted to try to steer her to what I call more reputable realtors. So I called a hurdle between she and Suzanne and I said, well, she had about 150 acres. I said, let's offer to give them a listed for $1 million and require at least $400,000 down, 40%. And I thought that would run them off. Lo and behold, they accepted under those terms. It wasn't 2 weeks later till they came with a contract from a fellow by the name of Charlie Smith, who was a speculator in town trying to buy up land. Charlie was from Missouri. He had wore a big cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and he had an entourage that run around with him. He had his son, his preacher, and his real estate advisor and everything. And they would come in the office and barge in as most any time, and I'd got to know him pretty well. And every time he was coming in, he wanted to get some concessions. And I just stayed pat and said, well, this is the way the contract provides. And anyway, it closed. Miss Foster got her $400,000 down. She had to pay a $60,000 realty fee, but she had the rest of it clear and free and clear, and had a first mortgage on all the rest of the property, 150 acres. Well, it wasn't long till old Charlie come back and said, we want to get you to release the eastern third of the property on which the YMCA and the apartment buildings are down, and he got that zone commercial, and we want you to release that from the mortgage. And I said, no, I don't think there's any advantage to Ms. Foster to do that. And he said, well, if you don't release it, we just got to pay you off. Now, I hope everybody's familiar with the old fairy tale about Peter Rabbit in the briar patch when he got caught in Farmer Brown's garden, and he was talking about what he was going to do with it. And Peter Rabbit kept saying, anything except throw me in that briar bed, anything except that. Well, I felt just like Peter Rabbit in saying that Charlie was going to pay us off. And anyway, to make sure that I was right, I got a CPA friend of mine, Ray Sanderson, to do a projection, a tax projection, because Miss Foster had not had any income to amount to anything for a few years. It was not going to cost her a penny in extra taxes. So I called up Charlie, and I felt just exactly like Peter Rabbit and the Briar Patch. I said, Charlie, we're just going to have to let you pay us off. And he did. He wound up, he refinanced it with S&L and out of Texas. They went broke after foreclosure, and it was sold at foreclosure, and that's where Isaac Daniel wound up buying it, and now the YMCA is located on it.
Okay.
I'm okay if we want to keep going, yes.
You served for a while as a city judge. What did you observe about repeat offenders and their possible rehabilitation?
Well, it was pretty obvious. We had a lot of public drunks or drunk-related cases, and the records at the City of Columbia at that time was on index cards, and there would be one line per each offense, and then it just had the offense and then the disposition. And some of those individuals were coming in there with a stack of index cards. I mean, and just, in other words, numerous repeat offenders. Well, it didn't take a very smart man to figure out that what we were doing was not very effective. I mean, what we were doing was I'd fine them a minimum of $10 cost, maybe come out with a total of $25, and occasionally I'd try to get their attention and put them in jail for a night, overnight, or something like that. But it didn't take very long to figure that the system that we had been following was not working. So that's when they were just starting the mental health clinic down in Columbia. There was a Dr. Orr, who was a psychiatrist, had been at Vanderbilt, had retired from Vanderbilt, and had come down there to start the mental health clinic. And he was director of it, and was a young psychologist by the name of George Spain that was working under him. And I called them up, and I said, here's the problem. I think there ought to be some solution that we can do to try to give these people some help. So Dr. Orr, he just plainly said, well, I've been dealing with drunks all my life, and I don't know any answer to it. But young George Spain, he was enthusiastic enough, said, I'm willing to try to give classes that you can sentence them to attend the classes to do some group therapy as far as the alcohol-related offenses. And so we started that. And I wish I could say it was an overwhelming success. It was not, but it was, I think, to a certain extent, successful. And I'm pleased to say that within a year or two, the state of Tennessee adopted that same procedure, which became the law. And it's still the same old problem of dealing with alcoholism, which is not a very easy. No easy solution, but at least it was something in the right direction rather than just putting them in jail for overnight or something like that.
Several years ago, you went through a split up in a law firm, and then you started your own firm, which has been successful for many years. What do you attribute the success of your law firm to? Well,
I got two outstanding young men, I think, Frank Dale and Bill Graham, good local lawyers who were, neither one of them are trial lawyers. They're not aggressive as far as seeking business, but they're good, solid thinkers, and they're community minded, and really we followed the same philosophy of being able to give our clients our 100% effort and charge as little as we could to be able to make a living on, and not to get rich, but to be available to help our clients whatever they, whenever we could. And I think that it's been very satisfactory in the sense we have not become wealthy. We've made livings, but that's about all I think a lawyer ought to expect. Be able to support his family and make a decent living.
You once helped a lady in her estate planning, but the planning was later changed when a caretaker intervened. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, that lady, I can't remember her name.
Maple Park.
Right, yeah, Maple Park. I first got to know she and her husband. They were delightful elderly couple that didn't have any children. They came to me. Okay, they came to see me to write their wills. They were primarily interested in taking care of each other, but at the death of the last one, they wanted it to go to Mr. Park's family, which was Buzz Lawwell, our General Sessions judge's mother, and her brothers and sisters. And so I drew the will to take care of that, and then this caretaker kept bringing her back to make changes in the will, and more of them in her favor. And I knew that there was undue influence being exerted. The lady's she was not incompetent, but she was highly dependent on this caretaker and could not refuse what she was demanding. And I knew it was a real problem. And I really didn't know what to do about it. And the last time I went out to see her, she wanted me to change her will to leave everything she had to this caretaker. I didn't really know how much she had. I knew she was pretty wealthy, and I came back and I asked her for permission to call her stockbroker, who I knew as to handling her affairs, and I called her stockbroker and said she had about $3.5 million account at his firm. And I knew I was not going to draw the will to leave all that money to this caretaker. And anyway, I kept trying to, I told her, it was right before Christmas, I told her I'd get back in touch with her after Christmas. Well, I started trying to get in touch with her. Every time I'd call, the caretaker would answer the phone and say she's asleep. And she never would call me back. And I knew there was something going on, but it wasn't anything I could do about it. And sure enough, the caretaker did get another lawyer to draw her will, leaving everything to her, and the lady died under those circumstances. And of course, there was a will contest and I was a key witness, and I knew I could not participate as an attorney, but I was a key witness, and we tried the case non-jury in front of Judge M.T. Hamilton, and he set aside the will. It was appealed, and Court of Appeals upheld it. Judge Koch wrote an opinion and said that there was one of the more blatant examples of undue influence that he had seen. The case was not appealed to the Supreme Court, so it's not reported. But the opinion that Judge Koch wrote upheld it on the basis of undue influence.
Did you gain a different perspective of the trial experience being a witness as opposed to being the lawyer?
Very much so. Yes, I'd been a witness in 2 or 3 cases during my lifetime. It is quite a bit different, really. I mean, you realize that what the oath means, and that you are trying to your best to tell it the best you can, the way you remember it. Yeah, when an attorney, you're an advocate. You're not required to make that decision.
What have you found to be the most important rewards of a career practicing law?
Well, I'd have to say it'd be of service. I don't think that that certainly I have not, and most lawyers do not change the world. But you know, if you can, if you know you have served your clients, you've made an honest living for you and your family, and you come out with a reputation of being trustworthy among your fellow lawyers and people you deal with, I think that's about all you can expect out of a career of lawyer, really.
Why don't we take a break right now?
Okay.
Okay.